centres in an island, not widely sundered from the continent, and so tilted that its mountains lie all to the west and north, while south and east is a gently undulating landscape of wooded valleys, open downs, and slow rivers. It is very accessible to the invader, whether he comes in peace or war, as pirate or merchant, conqueror or missionary. Those who dwell there are not insensitive to any shift of power, any change of faith, or even fashion on the mainland, but they give to every practice, every doctrine that comes to it from abroad, its own peculiar turn and imprint. A province of the Roman Empire, cut off and left to sink or swim in the great convulsion of the Dark Ages, reunited to Christendom and almost torn away from it once more by the heathen Dane, victorious, united but exhausted, yielding almost without resistance to the Norman conqueror, submerged, it might seem, within the august framework of Catholic feudalism, was yet capable of reappearing with an individuality of its own. Neither its civilization nor speech is quite Latin, nor quite Germanic. It possesses a body of custom which, whatever its ultimate sources may be, folkright brought from beyond the seas by Danes and by Saxons before them, maxims of civil jurisprudence culled from Roman codes, is being welded into one common law. This is England in the 13th century, the century of Magna Carta and of the First Parliament. As we gaze back into the mists of time, we can very faintly discern the men of the Old Stone Age and the New Stone Age, the builders of the great megalithic monuments, the newcomers from the Rhineland with their beakers and tools of bronze. Standing on a grassy down where Dover now is, and pointing to the valley at his feet, one of them might have said to his grandson, "The sea comes farther up that creek than it did when I was a boy." And the grandson might have lived to watch a flood tide, a roaring swirl of white water sweeping the valley from end to end, carving its grassy sides into steep chalk edges and linking the North Sea with the Channel. No wanderings henceforth of little clans in search of game or food-yielding plants from the plains of France or Belgium to the wooded valleys and downs of southern England. No small ventures in dug-out canoes across narrow inlets at slack water. Those who come now must come in ships, and bold and wary they must be to face and master the Channel fogs and the Channel tides, and all that may lie beyond them. Suddenly the mist clears. For a moment the island stands in the full light of historic day. In itself, the invasion of Britain by Julius Caesar was an episode that had no sequel, but it showed that the power of Rome and the civilization of the Mediterranean world were not necessarily bounded by the Atlantic coast. Caesar's landing at Deal bridged the chasm which nature had cloven. For a century, while the Roman world was tearing itself to pieces in civil war, or slowly recovering under a new imperial form, Britain remained uneasily poised between isolation and union with the continent, but absorbing, by way of trade and peaceful intercourse, something of the common culture of the West. In the end, Rome gave the word, and the legions sailed. For nearly 400 years, Britain became a Roman province. This considerable period was characterized for a great part of the time by that profound tranquillity which leaves little for history to record. It stands forth sedate, luminous, and calm. And what remained? Noble roads, sometimes overgrown with woodland. The stupendous work of the Roman wall, breached and crumbling. Fortresses, market towns, country houses, whose very ruins the next comers contemplated with awe. But of Roman speech, Roman law, Roman institutions, hardly a vestige. Yet we should be mistaken if we therefore suppose that the Roman occupation could be dismissed as an incident without consequence. It had given time for the Christian faith to plant itself. Far in the west, though severed from the world by the broad flood of barbarism, there remained, sorely beset but defended by its mountains, a tiny Christian realm. British Christianity converted Ireland. From Ireland, the faith recrossed the seas to Scotland. Thus the newcomers were enveloped in the old civilization. While at Rome, men remembered that Britain had been Christian once and might be Christian again. This island world was not wholly cut off from the mainland. The southeast, at all events, kept up a certain intercourse with its Frankish cousins across the straits, and hence came the Roman missionaries. They brought with them a new set of beliefs which, with some brief, if obstinate, resistance here and there, were accepted with surprising readiness. They brought a new political order, a church which was to have its own rulers, its own officers, its own assemblies, and make its own laws, all of which had somehow or other to be fitted into the ancient customs of the English people. They planted the seed of a great problem, the problem of church and state, which will grow until 1,000 years later it almost rives the foundations of both asunder. But all this lies in the future. What mattered at the moment was that, with her conversion, England became once more part of the Western world. Very soon English missionaries would be at work on the continent. English pilgrims would be making their way across the Alps to see the wonders of Rome, among them English princes who, their work in this world being done, desired that their bones should rest near the tomb of the apostles. Nor was this all, because the English people now have an institution which overrode all local distinctions of speech or custom or even sovereignty. Whatever dynastic quarrels might go on between the kingdoms, the Church was one and indivisible. Its rights are everywhere the same. Its ministers are sacred. The kingdom of Kent may lose its ancient primacy. Northumbria make way for Mercia. But Canterbury and York remain. The contrast is startling between the secular annals of these generations, with their meagre and tedious records of forays and slaughter, and the brilliant achievements of the English Church. The greatest scholar in Christendom was a Northumbrian monk. The most popular stylist was a West Saxon abbot. The apostle of Germany was Boniface from Devon. The revival of learning in the empire of Charlemagne was directed by Alcuin of York. But this youthful, flourishing, immature civilization lacked any solid military defence. The north was stirring again. From Denmark up the Baltic, up the Norwegian fjords, the pirate galleys were once more pushing forth in search of plunder and of new homes for a crowded people. An island without a fleet, without a sovereign to command its scattered strengths, rich in gold pieces, in cunning metalwork and rare embroideries, all stored in defenceless churches and monasteries, was a prize which the heathen men might think reserved for them whenever they chose to lay their hands on it. Those broad, slow rivers of the English plain invited their galleys into the very heart of the country, and once on land, how were rustics hurriedly summoned from the plough to resist the swift and disciplined march of armed bands, mounted or on foot. When the storm broke, the north, the Midlands, the east went down under its fury. If Wessex had succumbed, all would have been lost. Gradually, however, it became manifest that the invaders had come not only to ravage, but to settle. At last, the hurricane abated, and men could take count of their losses. A broad strip of land along the middle of the eastern coast and stretching inland as far as Derby was in Danish hands. Seafarers turned farmers were still holding together as an army. But London, already one of the great ports of northern Europe, had been saved, and all the south, and here was the seat and strength of the royal house. The tie with the mainland had not been severed. Year by year, sometimes by treaty, sometimes by hard fighting, King Alfred's dynasty laboured to establish its ascendancy and reunite the land. So successful were they that the temporary substitution of a Danish for an English king made little mark on history. He, too, was a Christian. He, too, made the pilgrimage to Rome. After this brief interlude, the old line returned to the throne, and might have remained there from one generation to another. Yet in 3 short winter months, between October and Christmas Day in 1066, the astounding event had happened. The ruler of one French province, and that not the largest or most powerful, had crossed the Channel and made himself King of England. The structure into which the Norman enters with a strong hand was a kingdom, acknowledged by all who spoke the king's English, and claiming some vague sovereignty over the Welsh and Scots as well. It was governed, we may say, by the king in council, and the council consisted of his